Okay, we are going to be looking at the Greek orders. So remember that they had a formula for their temple construction. So it's important to know that this is a formula that the Greeks would use to build their temples. So the Romans would borrow like the parts that they liked from different temples, whereas the Greeks would just follow almost like following a recipe. So the first one that we have on the left side, this is in your study guide 20, right? So it's study guide 20, flip to the back, right? This first one is our Doric order. So it comes from the Dorian area, so it's from the mainland. And so let's kind of look at just kind of basic temple construction. Okay, so the very top of it, right, this kind of like triangular section that we have is called the pediment. So you could even draw yourself a little triangle to kind of help you remember that that is kind of like the top portion of it. And then underneath of it, there's this horizontal element that's often broken up into different shapes, and we call that the entablature. Okay, and then we have the column. So from the top to the bottom, we call that the column. And then the Greek temples are on top of platforms. And so we call all of them, right? So like together, right? They're called the Stylobate. So stereo is just many. So like with stereo radio, normally there's multiple speakers. So Stylobate is the multiple steps, right? The very top platform, so the one that you would actually physically walk on, is called a Stylobate. So this is pretty much the vocabulary for all of the different Greek and Roman temples. The top triangular section is a pediment, then the horizontal section is the entablature, then we have the column, and then we have the platform that it's on. And so the Romans didn't necessarily use stairs, and we'll learn that later. So then you would see that there are these different parts that we also have to identify. The things, especially in the pediment and the entablature, that's where the Greeks put all those beautiful sculptures that we saw. So it is important to know where they go, to think about like the context and the setting in which they would have been seen. So inside, like I said, our pediment, we might have that Helos imagery, right? The three goddesses imagery, the birth of Athena, the fight between Poseidon and Athena would all have been in that pediment. So then this top section right here, the very top section of the entablature, is called the frieze. And in other styles like Ionic, that might be like a running frieze. And so you see that on the temple of Nike Athena. You might have like sculptural relief. So there'd be decoration in there instead of it being smooth. In a Doric order, right, they have this 3-section area here that is called the Triglyph. The L, so Triglyph, and then the space in between is the metope or the metope, right? And so at the Parthenon, that's where they have all the lapis and centaur relief sculptures. And so there would have been sculpture in this kind of square section, and then this would just be kind of fluted, okay? This section underneath that frieze is called the architrave. And in different orders, that architrave looks like wooden slats. But in a Doric order, it's just smooth, right? So then if we break down the column here, we have the very top of it, which we call a capital. And that's probably a vocabulary term that you need to make sure that you know, because that's going to tell us, one, what kind of temple it is. That will really help us identify it. But also that's another place where they often put decoration. So we know that it's Doric because it is in the shape of a D. So it's like a flattened D shape, right? Doric capitals, or excuse me, Doric orders always have fluted. So it's not smooth, but ridges. They look like bundles of reeds. They kind of got that from the Egyptians as well. And they have no base. So we call this part the shaft of the column. Okay. So then as we move on to the next one, a lot of the vocabulary is going to remain the same. This one over here is the Ionic Order. And so it was developed in the Ionian Islands. And so it too has a pediment. It also has this added part here. And you see this in a lot of homes and decorations. It's like a trim. It's called a raking cornice. I forgot to fill it in over here on the Doric one. But this is this added kind of embellishment that can be on an angle, which is raking, or it could just be horizontal, which is just a typical cornice, right? So then here we have that frieze again, and in a Ionic temple, that would have decoration. So you could even label that for yourself, right? You could label all the places where like decoration would happen. Then we have our architrave. And early Greek temples were made out of wood. And so there's still kind of like references to them where they look like they have horizontal elements. And then we also have unique columns. So Ionic orders have these Ionic capitals. And so we call these volutes. So V-O-L-U-T-E, and these are the scrolls, right? So they kind of like scroll. And then we have the shaft again. And then Ionic columns have a base. All right, so this too is just the whole capital. I don't think it's necessary for us to fill that in. Okay. So then the last one that we have that's a different order is we have our Corinthian capital. And so a Corinthian order, right, is from Corinth. And it was the last to be developed. So Doric was first, then Ionic, and then Corinthian. And the cool thing is that certain temples have different decorations. So like the Parthenon has Ionic decoration on the inside, so in the inside of the cella. So they actually can combine the different orders together to make a really unique structure. But it's basically Doric, then Ionic, and then chronological order. Doric is just a variation of Ionic. So it has a lot of the same sort of details to it. It's got the pediment, it's got an entablature that has a frieze and an architrave. The unique thing about it is its capitals. It's made out of vegetation. And so the Greeks have, and I've seen it, it's called a canthus. It's this green leafy plant that they would often use for garlands and, that they would use for different ceremonies. It grows pretty wildly all along where the Parthenon is. And so they would use it like I said, to decorate, but then they started to use it with their as decoration. And so there are little volutes, so you can barely see them. It's these little things over here. There's tiny, tiny little scrolls. So that's part of that Ionic Order, right? It has volutes, but then it also has leaves. And different cultures will do variations of this Corinthian Capital. Instead of using a canthus, like in the United States Capitol building, they use ears of corn. Right? But it also has a Stylobate. It also has this little decorative area over here that I didn't label, but they're called dentals or denials or something like that. It looks a lot like dental, and I remember it because it looks like teeth, right? Because they're just like these little rectangular shapes. I don't think we're going to have to worry too much about like floor plans of the Greek temples, but I would highlight, right, the ones that we actually have in our image set, right? So this is our temple of Nike Athena. It's the amphithyropostyle, right? So the last one here. This is our temple, Nike Athena. So that's that tiny little temple right by the, can't read that because I wrote over myself here. Let me grab an eraser. Smudging it all over the place. See if I have any success here. Right. So it is this style where they have these little porches or pronos. And then they have the naus, or what we often call the cella. Right? And so the kind of the riches or the image of the goddess might be inside there, right? The other one that we have is this one. And so this is the peripateral, I'm going to say it wrong, I apologize. And that is the one that is for the Parthenon. So Parthenon is a variation of this. So it has the cella, right? And then it has two porches, has one on each side. Now, if you remember, ours also has a treasury in the back, right? But you can see on the floor plans, all these little circles are columns, right? These are all like wall fortifications. And so in the Parthenon, that's where the Ionic decoration is incorporated, right, with the running friezes. So a lot of those like plaques of the restings are on the interior rather than on the exterior of it. And then these are the Stylobates, which you see like you can come up from any sort of direction to enter into the temple.